my favorite shows. I love the music from the Suits. And of course, it's the best music ever to introduce the Legal Beat with Stacey Nichols. Good morning, Stacey.
Good morning.
We've had quite a week.
It has been quite a week. It's been quite a few months, really. There's been a lot of stories.
And where shall we start? Shall we start with Matthew de Grood? Go ahead.
Sure. Well, there was a finding that he was indeed not criminally responsible and therefore not convicted in the deaths of the 5 people that he had killed at that University of Calgary party. So, you know, what that means for him is that he won't be sentenced in the regular course. Mm-hmm. He will go into a psychiatric facility. The Crown has indicated their intention that they will likely bring an application to have him designated as a high-risk NCR, which is fairly recent legislation that was brought into place when the Conservatives were in power, meaning that, you know, there will be different considerations for him. He may never be released from the psychiatric facility. There will be longer times between the reviews, and, you know,
So this would seem. I think back to the case with the fellow who beheaded the passenger on the bus, whereas he now is out on some, is it day release kind of thing? He's getting assimilated back into the community.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so this guy is rated a higher risk.
Well, the application hasn't been made yet, so the designation hasn't been made yet. But the Crown hasn't said for sure whether they're going. I mean, he's quite stable now. Mm-hmm. I mean, even through the trial process. I'm not sure if you saw, but he gave quite a heartfelt statement to the families after the NCR finding came down.
Apologizing, yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But they're saying that doctors testified that he was suffering psychotic delusions, which led him to believe an end of the World War was taking place and his victims were part of the other side. So obviously, this is something that you slip in and out of.
Absolutely.
From what I can read. But when you slip into it,
yeah.
I think unfortunate, yeah.
Oh, it is. They're such tragic situations. And, you know, it's obviously extremely hard for victims' families to cope. And in his situation, from what I understand, he didn't have a long history of mental illness.
Wow.
Yeah. So his symptoms had come on just, you know, kind of shortly before the offenses took place.
So he's really not had the opportunity to even really address it as an ongoing issue, because it can take a long time to get a proper diagnosis, to get into some kind of a regimen of treatment.
Absolutely.
Now, Stacey, the family has said that the finding of NCR is going to be a recurring nightmare for them. Right. Why?
Well, I think because when someone is found NCR, there is the possibility, such as the case that we were just talking about, I believe it was Mr. Lee was the accused person in that case. There's a possibility that at a very short amount of time the person could be on day passes or even fully discharged into the community. So I think especially when we're, you know, not especially, it's tragic in any situation, but we're dealing with families of young persons who are going to university. You know, the thought that the person that, I guess, you know, killed your child, admittedly killed your child, is going to be offered freedoms within a fairly short period of time is very hard to accept.
Oh, it certainly would be.
Although he could spend the rest of his life in a mental facility, but I guess what it means for our listeners who are not familiar with the process, and I'm not sure I am terribly familiar with it, especially with the changes, does it mean then that it's sort of like parole, where they have to keep, you know, being involved every few years because they say, well, now we think he's okay, and then are they asked then or told or how? They remain involved in any sense, right?
You're talking about the review board, or the family? They're told, yeah. There's an absolute obligation that they're told, you know, what's going on, and they're permitted to give input. But really, the major consideration is going to be how stable the person is, how, you know, agreeable they are to taking their medication. Right. I mean, that's going to be the major factor.
And then in the case where they do get the opportunity to have the limited release on day pass, it is monitored. This is not like saying, you know, open the door and bye-bye.
No, absolutely not. No, it's generally an extremely long process. Yeah. It's a very step-by-step process, and it's closely monitored.
Yeah. As I understand it, the families will every year have to meet with a mental health review board, which if it were me, I to relive that every year, I completely get it. But on the other hand, how can you put somebody in a prison who is mentally ill?
Right, exactly. And we've talked about it before on the show. Yeah. I mean, you know, to me, going back many steps in making sure that people with mental illnesses, the issues are addressed properly from the get-go, could potentially avoid all of this. Yeah.
And now, the never-ending, or it
bizarre.
seems like never-ending, and this is another gory trial, the Tim Bosma trial.
Absolutely.
The jury has now heard all the evidence.
They've heard all the evidence. What a long trial that was. They heard a lot of evidence. We're still probably quite a couple of 3 weeks at least away from a verdict, because a lot of things have to happen before the jury actually is sent out for deliberations, and they're going to have a lot to go through.
They are. Well, it was like I would read at the end of each day in the newspaper, and it's like watching some weird crime drama, because the testimonies were so strange at times.
They were very strange and so contradictory.
That's it, right? And it's I don't envy the task that the jury will be facing, because you're having to take testimony that, like you say, there's contradiction, there's some strange characters involved.
There's absolutely some strange characters involved. Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And it's one of those situations where the two accused persons are pointing the finger at each other.
Yeah.
We call that a cutthroat defense, and it very rarely works out for either party. I mean, we'll see what happens here, but the evidence seems pretty overwhelming.
So, even though the evidence is complete, of course, the trial isn't finished, all the lawyers are now going to meet with Justice Andrew Goodman for a 2-part pre-charge conference before closing arguments, and Goodman's charge to the jury. Is that a normal?
Yep, absolutely. The pre-charge conference is for the lawyers to give their input into what the judge is going to tell the jury about the law that they have to apply. So it's ultimately up to the judge what he tells the jury, or he in this case, he or she tells the jury, but the lawyers are given an opportunity to, like I say, give input into what is said.
And then the lawyers' closing arguments to the jury will begin on Wednesday, June the 1st. Now, given that we have, what did you call this, where they're both pointing the finger?
A cutthroat defense.
A cutthroat defense. Given that we have a cutthroat defense, do you expect that this will be a longer charge to the jury or closing arguments than
Absolutely.
normal?
Yeah, it'll be long. It'll be days probably.
Days?
I would think so.
Wow.
I would say at least. I mean, I'm guessing, but because the judge also not only will he go through the law, but he will review a good portion of the evidence with the jury, and put forth all 3 theories of all of the parties to the jury. So it'll take some time.
And then the lawyers?
The lawyers' closing arguments?
Yeah.
I think, what did I see? I think that they had set, was it 2 or 3 days ahead just for closing arguments?
Wow.
Yeah.
This is exhaustive for the jury members,
Well,
and for
the
the family that are there, that have been there
Right.
in the courtroom throughout the process.
Well, yeah, I mean, the jury has been there for 4 months.
Yeah.
I know.
And lots and lots and lots of details, and back and forth, and trying to sort through it.
Absolutely.
And now it sounds like it's going to be a week or 2 between
Right.
the charge and closing arguments.
Yep. And then they still have to deliberate.
And then they have to deliberate, and who knows how long that will take. I mean, with the nature of the things that they've been listening to, and it's got to be tough.
Oh, very tough. Very tough. And again, like as you were just saying, at the end of an arduous, trial of sitting there every day hearing all of this evidence, it's tough.
And especially contradictory evidence.
Mm-hmm.
Where you, as a layperson, are sitting there and you have to hear so much more before, and then you're going to have to make a decision. I do not envy them.
No, I don't envy them at
And,
all.
No.
and I think this would take a lot of time.
It will. It
The
will.
deliberations, I think.
Regardless. Yeah, absolutely it will. I've been involved in long trials like this, and the jurors get very frustrated. Especially when things take longer than expected. I'm not exactly sure how long this trial was set for at the beginning. I can't imagine it didn't go over, though.
Yeah.
So when you're trying to plan your life and you think you're going to be done and then you're not, it gets frustrating.
So in a situation like this, in a trial like this, would you expect the deliberations to last a while?
Oh, I would. But just by virtue of having to go through the evidence. I mean, jurors, in my experience anyway, like they do their job. I mean, they go through everything.
Well, people take it seriously. I've been on a jury once, and you do take it seriously.
Sure.
And I only had to go through it for a couple of weeks.
Right.
Like this is a long. It would be very exhausting.
Yeah.
But you take that charge seriously. It's funny. I remember getting called to jury duty, and I'm like, ugh. You go in there with this whole, oh my gosh. But once you're on that jury, even though, you're showing up day after day and you're not getting a quote salary, anything like that,
No.
you take it very seriously.
Right. I have people, and that's some of the biggest frustration of actually having a jury trial and having to pick a jury is because so many people are trying to get out of it.
Oh, it's true.
Yeah.
Actually,
Yeah.
that was the most entertaining part of the process to me, was that whole beginning part where people trying to get out.
Yeah. So that's interesting, but I can't do it. I would
No.
never be allowed, but I would want to.
I was never allowed either. Well, because, working in the news business, you're very often talking to police about stories.
Right,
and
right.
you're talking off the cuff. It may not be part of something that you're allowed to say, but you're getting background. So whenever I came up, and I think it was 2 or 3 times, and they would just look at me and go, no. No thanks.
But it is
But
an
you still had
interesting
to go
thing
and
to go
sit.
through.
Oh, yeah.
And to actually experience what it's like to be in the courtroom situation. I'd never been in a courtroom, ever in my life.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand that the respect that's given the jury is actually quite,
Oh, absolutely.
it's outstanding, really. To understand the interaction between the lawyers and the judge, and to get to know our court officer who took care of us and made
Right.
sure we were in and out, to really understand the court process. It was educational, it was interesting, and it was actually, in its own way, afterward, I had people ask me, I said, it was an honor, actually, to be involved. Yeah. We have another story that, this one came up the other day, and I realized this was in Britain, but something that I can totally see happening here too, is that a restaurateur was sentenced 6 years in jail after a customer with a peanut allergy died.
Right. Yeah. No, I found that a very interesting story.
Really interesting.
Yeah. I think with that story, if he didn't have the background that he did, it seemed that he was flagrantly disregarding a lot of rules. It had happened to someone else in one of his restaurants. It just didn't sound like he was paying a lot of attention. If there wasn't all that buildup, he probably wouldn't have suffered such serious repercussions. But he clearly was negligent.
So the food allergies are so common these days, and people are taking it more and more seriously. If a situation like this, is it the restaurateur who would be in trouble? Would it be? I just see it kind of staggering, trailing down from that. Like, was it the waiter that didn't communicate? It was the kitchen that didn't take it seriously. Was it? There's so many people who could be. It makes you really think hard if you're working in a restaurant.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what I was kind of trying to say. If it was just a one-off, and and you could pinpoint it to one certain thing, but with this particular individual, it seemed like he just.
Well, I think somebody else, another customer, had been hospitalized after eating a chicken korma from another one of this gentleman's restaurants, which was supposed to be peanut-free, and they said they actually had a trading standards officer who visited the restaurant a week before this man died and found evidence of peanuts in a meal the officer had been told was peanut-free.
Exactly, yeah.
Which begs the question, why didn't you shut them down?
Well,
yeah.
I get this, but why didn't you shut them down? You had somebody who was, testing the standards, found peanuts in a peanut-free dish. Shut them down.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
So I think I think they're partially responsible for that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I have to agree with that. It's similar to when, like, the civil cases in Ontario where bartenders or restaurateurs became responsible if someone left their establishment.
Yes.
When they were,
drinking.
when they were really inebriated and then killed someone, you're civilly liable for that if you're not watching what your patrons are, how much they're consuming.
Yeah, in this case, though, it was a situation where they said he was clearly in debt. He had a few restaurants, and he was putting profit ahead of safety.
Yeah.
But I would question. This happened in England.
Yes.
I would still question why the standards officer did not shut him down when he himself found a dish with peanuts in it, which can kill people.
Absolutely.
Well, it certainly, I think, would raise some flags and make restaurant owners on this side of the pond take notice and really think about it. I find that in Canada, restaurants they take it quite seriously.
Oh, I think so. I think our standards, our standards are very high. One wonders if they're quite as high, or just by virtue they probably have a bazillion more restaurants than we do, right? Like, it's harder to monitor.
No, I think we have really high standards. I remember trying to buy a gluten-free cake, and they told me there is no gluten in this cake. However, we cannot certify it as gluten-free because there are other parts of the kitchen where there are other things being baked, and we cannot guarantee that there is not one titch of flour on it somewhere.
Right.
So they're pretty, I think our standards are pretty meticulous.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think they are too. Yeah.
And this is about gluten, which is unlikely.
Exactly.
If your cake rested on a board that had just a dusting of flour, is unlikely to kill somebody.
No, absolutely not.
Wow.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So we will be keeping an eye on, definitely keeping an eye on the progress in the Tim Bosma murder trial and see what goes on there. And always a pleasure speaking with you, Stacey.
You as well. Thank you.
And that is today's Legal Beat, brought to you by Neuberger Partners LLP, one of Canada's leading criminal defense law firms, expertly defending clients since 1992. Visit them online at nrlawyers.com. This is What She Said on Canada Talks, Channel 167, SiriusXM. Stay with us.
Click the channel subscribe button for full-length interviews and more from What She Said here on YouTube.